my name is Sofia Nystro. I work at Copenhagen Economics in Stockholm, and I was part of the team that estimated the USO of the net cost of the USO net cost of Iceland post 2016. And I will show you how the approach behind this estimation, what was it actually that we did when we did this estimation. And the presentation is divided into 4 different parts. Number 2, 3, and 4 will make more sense when we have gotten through number 1, so I will get back to that. So I will start off just explaining the concept of the USO net cost, and with an illustrative example. So it's actually just the difference between Iceland Post's profit with and without the USO. So we know we have an actual situation, this is today, where we have a USO that Iceland Post has to deliver upon. And then we illustrate a counterfactual scenario. So in that scenario, we assume that Iceland Post is just as any other commercial operator on the market. And that, of course, means that they would not spend time and effort and money on doing some stuff that they have to do when they are the universal provider. And the net cost is then only the difference between the actual situation with the USO, so the profit that they would have in that scenario, and the profit that we estimate that they would have in the counterfactual scenario. And I should also note that it's very likely that the actual profit is negative, which then imply a very large net cost, so that wouldn't be strange. When we do the estimation of the net cost, we use quite a common approach. It's called the commercial approach to calculate net cost. And we start off in the top left one here, which is just where are we today, what are we doing, what are the operations, what are the products. So we get to know the situation today. The next step is to define a counterfactual scenario. So what would Iceland Post do absent the USO is the question that we ask. Then we calculate the difference in costs and revenues today versus in the counterfactual scenario. So the question that we pose there is basically what would Iceland Post save absent the USO, but also what revenues would Iceland Post lose absent the USO. Then there are, of course, some good stuff about being the official provider. And we call this intangible and market benefits, and we have to include them as well. And that's the 4th step. And the question we pose there is, what are the intangible benefits derived from the USO? And in the end, we calculate the net cost of the USO, which is where we have the burden in A, and we withdraw the benefits in B. And I will show you, not in perfect detail, but at least in some detail, how we go about these 3 yellow steps. And these questions are then what you can find in the agenda for number 2, 3, and 4. So we will start about talking about the counterfactual scenario. So what would Iceland Post do if they didn't have to abide to the USO? What they do today, so the USO is divided into 5 different elements. It's about international mail, delivery frequency, delivery speed, delivery in the most rural areas, it's about 5%, and also shipments to the blind. And today, they are, as any other USO, obliged to deliver international mail at UPU and RAMES rates. They deliver A-mail 5 days per week and B-mail every other day. A-mail is the standard. It's overnight delivery for A-mail, and it's D+3 for B-mail, so it's a bit slower. Delivery in the most rural areas is 2 to 3 days per week, also for A-mail, and it's delivered to mailbox or door, so it's as in any other part of the country, home delivery. And the shipments for the blind are made for free. So, the Post would do some stuff differently in the counterfactual scenario. And remember now that we're assuming that the Iceland Post is a commercial player as any other market player. So they would, of course, not deliver inbound international mail at a rate in which they're losing money. So they would instead do it at a commercially viable rate. They would deliver 2 to 3 days per week in the whole country. We call this XY delivery. The new standard delivery speed would be D+3, so B-mail would be the new standard product. In the rural areas, they would deliver 2 to 3 days per week, but they would deliver to the nearest post office and not home delivery. And the delivery for the blind would be at standard rates. And I will show you a bit of hard facts behind why this counterfactual scenario looks as it does, especially for international mail and for delivery speed and frequency. And then I will go over our assessment, because we made an assessment of the counterfactual scenario, asking the question, is this reasonable or not? And how does it look in other parts of Europe? We can see that international agreements, and we're going to hear more about this later, given the developments in the US quite recently. But we know that the international agreements are quite a heavy burden on USO operators around the world. And Iceland is buying a lot of stuff from China. And China is considered a developing country by the UPU. And that means that for every letter or with an item that Iceland gets from China, Iceland Post has to deliver while making a negative profit. So they're actually losing money on average. And this is not something that a commercial operator would accept. Here is just a comparison showing what Iceland Post gets for a domestic letter and what they get for an international letter. So the international compensation as share of domestic compensation is about 70% for A letters and only 30% for registered letters. Another thing that is more related to delivery speed and frequency is that Iceland is a country with quite a low population density, especially compared to many other countries around the world. And that means that it's quite expensive to deliver. You have to travel long distances between receivers of mail. Also, you don't send that many letters in Iceland compared to some other countries, which is then that you have to travel long distances to deliver not that many letters, which of course makes it even more expensive. So getting a closer look at the counterfactual situation and whether it's reasonable or not, I can see that some stuff has jumped around here, but that's fine. Starting with the international mail, we can see that we do find that it is reasonable that Iceland Post would choose to only deliver these at commercially viable rates. And the motivation for that is that while the international agreements do imply losses, a commercial operator would not accept this. Regarding the delivery frequency, we also find that it's reasonable to deliver 2 to 3 days per week. We can see that this is a general trend in European countries, and also the geographical conditions that we just had a look at this just makes sense. Looking at the delivery speed, we can also see a European trend of removing D+1 from the USO. Looking at delivery speed, delivery in rural areas, we can see that other countries are doing similar changes in their service level in these areas. And looking at shipments for the blind, it's also reasonable to not deliver letters for free, because no commercial operator would do that. So we have found our counterfactual scenario, and what we have to do next is to find out what Iceland Post would save and what they would lose if they didn't have to oblige to do so. And there are actually both pros and cons from changing from the actual to the counterfactual. And we have looked at the cost effects, and when we do that, we sort of depart from the postal value chain. So we look at, okay, what happens in the different parts of the value chain? How does operations, how are they affected? And in this case, we will only see positive effects, because no commercial operator would start doing something that actually costs more if they didn't have to. The other part is the revenue effects, and here we instead depart from the different products that Iceland Post have. Sort of made a bit of a simplified version of the distribution of the products. But the thing is that here we can see both positive and negative effects, because we will, in some cases, have a worsened quality of service, which then may imply that people are less obliged to sending a letter. Maybe they just send an email instead. But we can also see some positive revenue effects from increased prices, etc. And I will go through some relevant examples, maybe not spend as much time on everyone. But starting with the cost effects, I've also put together the effect of reduced delivery speed and frequency. And we can see that this one leads to cost savings in 3 parts of the postal value chain. We do not see any effects in the collection or the transport. This would continue as ordinary. We would see a change in sorting, because when we go from D+1 to D+3, we don't need to do night sorting, so we don't need anyone working there overnight. The extra time also allows for increased automation, so we'll save a few monies there. And this actually have some effects later in the value chain as well in the local sorting, because the increased automation in the sorting, in the Nystro sorting, actually reduces time that they have to spend on local sorting as well. But of course, the main effects is in the delivery step. So we need fewer mailmen, fewer vehicles, and actually less fuel, because we don't travel as much to deliver the same letters. Looking at no home delivery in the most rural areas, we also have some significant cost savings, and especially in the delivery step. We don't see anything sorting, transport, local sorting. We do see some savings in the collection, because it's sort of very closely related to the delivery. But we have accounted for that in the delivery step. And of course, we have significant cost savings when we don't deliver anymore, when the receivers have to go and collect their mail at the post office instead. For the exact numbers of how different things are affected, I will guide you to the report and have a look at that. Looking at the revenue effects, from the reduced delivery frequency and delivery speed, we do see some revenue losses for up to 5 products. And these revenue losses stem from a decrease in demand. So when the service is reduced, the demand is reduced. We don't see any change in demand for international mail, and we actually see a small increase in demand for parcels when people uptrade from packets. Looking at the delivering incoming international mail at commercially viable rates, we can see that the revenue will increase. And this is quite interesting, because we have 2 effects that are opposing each other. So we have a decrease in demand because the prices are increased, but the increase in prices actually offset the negative effects of the lower volumes. So in the end, the revenue effect is positive. Looking at the reduced delivery in most rural areas, we can see that this is also a reduced quality of service. So we will have a decrease in demand, leading to revenue losses. But we do not see any change in demand for international mail and parcels from this change in the element. And charging for shipments for the blind do lead to a decrease in demand, but the increase in price is the dominant factor. So this is a positive effect. So summing all of this up, we have this table, which you can also find in the report. We can see that the international postal items is very, very big. And this is, of course, because of the negative profit with every item. So this is a very important question for Iceland Post today. And in the end, when we look at the net effect for every element and sum that, we get a total net cost of 800 million Icelandic krona. And this is not the burden, because we haven't done the intangible benefits yet, so we're not done. But this is the cost effects and the revenue effects from going from the actual scenario to the counterfactual scenario. And just a note on the future is that over time, the burden is actually expected to increase. And this is due to lowering letter volumes and a lot to the increasing e-commerce from China. And this is nothing that's, we see this all over Europe. So going over to the intangible benefits, so these are the upsides of being Iceland Post today, and they have to be included as well in this estimation. And what we're doing here is that, so we're about to subtract the benefits from the cons, basically, that we just went through. And the question we ask is, so does the USO entail a benefit not already accounted for in the calculation? And we can see that the USO in Iceland actually entails some special rights. It has to do with marketing, stamp issuance, exemptions from customs, etc. But all of these, we have estimated these, and they are quite a low value. So they're not included. But what is a significant value is, of course, the reserved area. So it's the monopoly on letters up to 50 grams. And we have estimated what the effect of opening up this part of the market for competition would be. And we find that the value of the reserved area is about 150 million Icelandic krona. And then we have to subtract that from the net cost, which we just found in the previous step. So 800 minus 150 is 650 million Icelandic krona. And just to clarify where we found what in this presentation today and also in the report, when looking at the difference in costs and revenues today and in the counterfactual scenario, we find that that difference is 800 million Icelandic kronas. So that's a negative burden for Iceland Post. But then we find that there's some good stuff as well. So they have a monopoly and they get some nice money from that. So that's something we have to withdraw from the negative burden, 150 million Icelandic krona. And that then leaves us with a net cost of the USO of 650 million krona in the end. And that's where I leave you.